like it was Ben on drums.
Grant's
dancing here. I don't know what I was doing. I was thinking it was air guitaring up here so you could see it.
Okay, all right, nice. I'm just trying.
I was doing the monkey, I guess. It just came out. I couldn't stop it.
I was waiting for Grant to bust out with a worm or something. So.
If I wasn't in a chair, the whole library of options would have gotten way bigger.
There you go. So welcome everybody to another edition of the Ben and Ryan Show, where we have fun. So today we have joining us, we have Ben Nadel, of course, my co-host.
Yo.
He's the Web 2 to Grant Powell's Web 3. So we have we have Grant Powell, the founder of Curios, joining us today, and many companies. So we're going to hear about his companies. So welcome, Grant.
Thanks, guys. Really excited to be here. Ben, big fan, so looking forward to chatting with you.
Very cool. I'm here to ask a lot of probably questions you've answered 1,000 times before, so consider this episode 1001.
Yeah, well, it never gets old, especially when it comes to Web3, NFTs, and collectibles. If we want to go there, I love answering those questions.
So I'll do a little introduction, and then Grant, I'll kind of pass it to you to kind of give the history of Curios and where you are now. But so this is an exciting company who started in the NFT, or started in kind of the platform NFT space, where they allowed others to kind of use NFTs. And then when that kind of marketplace imploded, they were able to pivot their company to actually using that technology. So it was an exciting time, and all this was made possible because of ColdFusion. So because of the rapid application development that you can do with ColdFusion, that allowed them to do all this pivoting and kind of coding from the get go. So an exciting time to kind of talk to Grant Powell. So Grant, thank you so much for joining us. Yeah. And can you give us a little history? I mean, I touched on that a little bit, but a history of kind of where you guys started and how you guys noticed you wanted to do a pivot and kind of the role that ColdFusion played in all this.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So we were a licensable platform, primarily targeting like brands and businesses who wanted to create NFTs. Who cares what the reason was for? Most of them were just to try and get rich quick. And so if you wanted to launch an NFT platform, well, you had to hire some, blockchain developer at $6 billion an hour, and you would take 2 hours to do something and tell you it was 200 hours. And there was all this, all this nebulism around what are NFTs and their purpose. And I went down my own rabbit hole and pretty quickly figured out that it's quite simple, right? You have a smart contract that you have to develop and deploy on chain. It then gives people the ability to mint tokens. Those tokens represent ownership of something, whether it's a digital piece of art like a JPEG or a membership or something like that. Anyways, realized that it was pretty easy to wrap that in a user experience and an API so that anybody could kind of do these complicated or confusing things easily with familiar interfaces like a REST API. And again, ColdFusion was phenomenal at building that because it's got built-in REST services and stuff, so we didn't have to build any of that from scratch. And that was the original idea. Now, once everybody realized that they weren't all going to get rich quick, except for the select few, like the Bored Ape Yacht Clubs and stuff, they all abandoned the platform and moved on to go back to their day jobs. In the meantime, there were actually a few really interesting ideas that came up, and they were around digital content primarily, because that's where NFTs really shine. Is holding an NFT, which is a little essentially an ID, right, in your Web3 wallet, proves that you own something intangible, like a file, right? A file is not physical; we can't touch it; it's an intangible. And that works really well for digital content, whether it's music, videos, JPEGs, ebooks, audiobooks. And one of our customers that was licensing our platform had seen great success and went out of business, not because of their idea, but because their parent company actually went under and the founder went to jail and stuff and all sorts of securities fraud. Yeah. Wow. If you want to look up the company, allegedly securities fraud, right? It was called Vinco Ventures and Zash Global. Strange phenomenon. But we realized they actually had something, and they didn't go out of business because their idea was bad. It was because of a operational problem. So we combined that and other tidbits that we had put together and used our own technology to launch our own creator digital content marketplace, and that's what Curios is today.
If we could just take a quick elevator pitch on NFTs. NFT, my understanding is it stands for non-fungible token. So like the idea that I guess they're unique. They can't just be replaced with something else. I think a lot of us are familiar with someone buying a JPEG of a monkey for however many tens of thousands of dollars. And that seems strange, I think, to a lot of us. As someone who is more steeped in the space, where do you feel like the sweet spot for NFTs is, or like where are you thinking that the real use cases exist?
Yeah. So underlying concept, proof of ownership of something intangible, where that applies in real world use cases, ownership of digital content. So there was another company called Redigi. The founder, John Ossenmacher, is actually on our board. And he was the founder of this company that allowed you to resell MP3s. So some time ago, you could buy and download MP3s. You still can from sites like Bandcamp, but that's pretty much being moved away from. And the idea was, instead of buying a CD, you buy the MP3, you download it, you can play it as much as you want. Then it's like, well, I'm done listening to this album, I'm going to sell it on a secondary store. But you don't have the physical album, you only have the digital one. So you could upload your files to Redigi and sell them. They got shut down by copyright law because they couldn't prove that the person selling the MP3 was the buyer of that MP3 file. They could have made infinite copies of it and sold it infinite times. And since they weren't the rights holder, they weren't legally allowed to do that. And this is where NFTs come into place. You get, the NFT essentially proves that you have the right to stream the content, and you're selling that right versus actually selling the content. And so far, copyright law hasn't shut this down. There may be a battle at some point, but it's a battle I personally would be willing to take on because this is the future.
Gotcha. All right, that makes sense. But the digital product itself, the MP3 in this case, it still has to live somewhere. So someone
so we do digital rights management where we store the content.
Gotcha.
And we make sure that the person trying to access it still holds the NFT. So we verify it in their wallet. If they don't, then they can't stream the content. Now, this all happens automatically behind the scenes, and it doesn't get in the way of the user experience, but that's the underlying tech.
Now, when you refer to wallet in this case, I have heard stories of like 20% of the monetary value of Bitcoin is currently wrapped up in wallets that people don't even know how to access anymore. Is this that same wallet technology, or NFTs managed in a different kind of wallet technology?
Yeah, so wallets are wallets, right? Okay. And there are layers built on top of wallets which help abstract things like authentication and recovery if you lose your codes and stuff like that. But the underlying wallet essentially is like an identifier and a password. Okay. And so what happens is when you own an NFT, in the smart contract that the NFT was created from, it stores this token number 3 is owned by wallet number, XYZ. And so if you're saying, well, hey, I'm the owner of that token, the contract says, great, prove it. And you provide your password. It's like, yes, that's correct. But these are, what do you call them? One-dimensional keys, right? They're not two-sided keys, right? So it's used for hashing, but can't be used for decrypting.
Okay.
And that's fundamentally what it is. So the wallet technology is an identifier and a password, and everything else on top of that are user interfaces and abstraction layers for authentication.
So then, do you allow people? Is there a secondary market for the digital content where someone who bought it can then resell it?
Yeah, so we built and hosted a very robust secondary market that we recently paused because most of the creators coming onto our platform now are saying we don't want a secondary market because they're not yet comfortable with it, right? They see a secondary market as somebody selling their content and the secondary market seller keeping the money versus that money going to the author or the musician, right? So what we're trying to figure out in cooperation with the authors and musicians is how could we create a secondary market that it creates a flow of funds that you're comfortable with. So if you sell the album for $10, this person wants to resell it for $9, but the musician gets $8 or $7, right? So the person who bought it originally gets $2 back because they're not listening to it anymore. It's like, hey, well, that's kind of like the old school CDs, right? You buy it for 10, You resell it for $3. I'm done listening to it. Get a few bucks back.
Well, but this is an interesting thing because it's like we're trying to superimpose constraints of the physical world on the digital world. And it's a weird little bit of a mind bend, because if I say go to the store and I buy a pair of pants for $70 and I wear them for a couple of months, and then they're not in fashion anymore, and I need to be obviously on fleek all the time, I go and resell them, but I've been wearing them for months, so I can't necessarily.
I have always thought of you as a fashion icon, Ben. So
it's kind of what I'm known for, only secondary as a programmer. I can't turn around and resell them for $70 because there's been wear and tear. They're not in fashion anymore. There's a degrading process. Things have a half-life. But in the digital world, an MP3 that you bought 7 years ago is still physically, in quotes here, but it's like the exact same data. There's no kind of
it's like
degradation
it's
process. So a secondary market, I mean, does it ever make sense to sell something at a discount? I guess it's only driven by popularity. You get what you can get.
Yeah, it's a great question. And we do believe there's a solution to this, but this is why we paused it, right? Yeah. Because we don't want to create something that creators aren't comfortable with. Now, although I'm talking a lot in the context of physical items, I'm using those as analogies and metaphors for people to understand. But we're not trying to make digital work the same way as physical. What we are trying to do is solve specific problems, like how do you prove ownership of digital content to prevent copywriting and rights management issues? How do you help creators maximize, monetization of their content? How do you solve for subscription fatigue, where people are like, if I want to listen to music, I just subscribe here, and Netflix and Spotify and Amazon, and like, oh my gosh, can I just pay like a couple $1,000, own the entire library of music I want to own, and listen to it all the time? So we're trying to solve things like that. But back to your question. So there's another use case. So Tory Lanez is somebody who sold 1 million albums through our platform, digital albums.
Wow.
And he only sold 1 million, which first of all was great.
Yeah.
But if there was 1,000,001 people who wanted to listen to it, they couldn't, because it wasn't streaming anywhere. Still not streaming anywhere. So the only place you can listen to it is on our platform. So when someone gets tired of listening to it, they sell it, and now somebody else can listen to it.
It's so I heard an interview. I don't know. I mean, this has got to be like 3 or 4 years ago, and this is maybe when NFTs were like really starting to become part of the zeitgeist conversation. One guy I heard an interview, his whole premise for being super excited about this was kind of that limited run type of thing where, like, let's say you want to go to a music concert and you have VIP backstage passes and you sell them as NFTs, and you only have 30 backstage passes, and literally you can't sell more than that. And so if someone else wants to be a VIP backstage pass, you'd have to sell them yours. And it creates this sort of, constraint that drives the value and the kind of tribalism and the, creating that true fans kind of feeling. It's interesting.
It's a great use case. Actually, ticketing and specifically VIP backstage passes is one of the biggest features on our platform that creators use. Musicians oftentimes can't choose what ticketing platform they use because they're beholden to the venue's ticketing platform, but they do get to choose how they manage their backstage passes. And so they'll use our platform for that. Token-based tickets actually solve a lot of problems in that, like, if you're buying a ticket, you can know that it's a real ticket on the secondary market versus a fake one, and it prevents some scalping issues.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, a question on that, because Ticketmaster does a secondary market that they validate the tickets.
Yeah.
Now, how are they getting away with that, or what are they doing? Because I assume they're not using blockchain for that.
No, they're not. So you have to look at your source of truth, right? And the whole Web3 movement is decentralizing that source of truth. So in Ticketmaster's case, they are the source of truth for their tickets, and if you verify it against them, you're good. The conspiracy theorists would say, well, what if I don't trust them, right? And I want a decentralized database to tell me whether or not this ticket's real. That's where Web3 comes in.
So let me ask you this, and maybe this is a silly question and it's just representative of my total naivete here. So you're building on a blockchain. Are you building I feel stupid even asking this. Is there like one blockchain that everyone builds on, or did you build your own
Great question,
blockchain
actually.
technology?
Phenomenal question. So we were the first platform that I ever found to offer more than 4 blockchains supported. So back at our peak, right, some of our competitors would support like Ethereum and Polygon, and then like maybe Solana. And we basically quickly realized that there are a lot of blockchains that are EVM based, which, gosh, I'm going to forget. It's something virtual machine. I can't remember. That supported a certain type of protocol. And it was like, once we wrote the functionality for that, we could just replicate it across all EVMs. And then we added a couple like random ones in there, like Tezos and Casper, which was based off of Rust, and Solana. Anyways, but all that to say that like, this is a problem because each blockchain becomes a walled garden. And then there are companies who are trying to build solutions that bridge between the gardens. I actually came up with something called Open Meta, which was this idea that, in the metaverse of blockchains or whatever, tokens could move freely from blockchain to blockchain. Meta, Facebook sued us for trademark violation. And even though they had no right, because their trademark of Meta specifically states you can't prevent other people from using this in combination with other words, they won out because they've got way more money than me. So we abandoned the trademark. But the concepts are still great, right? And there are other people trying to do this. So yes, each blockchain, you have to choose which blockchain you build on. And every blockchain that comes up has different pros and cons. And honestly, I think it's a problem. Like, can't there just be a blockchain?
Yeah. So again, I almost don't even know what right questions to ask, but is blockchain like a protocol? And then there are different implementations.
Think of a blockchain as a data source, but
okay.
A database, but each database with its own protocol. So like Postgres is different than MySQL, right? They're both databases, but you have to write different types of code, different queries to work with them.
All right. So, okay. Gotcha. So, okay. Interesting.
I have a question. Go ahead, Ben.
So, okay. So you talked about having more, you're offering support for more than 4 blockchain providers. Sorry.
Where do you go from there?
No, I'm just like, I'm a little, so, okay. So if a creator comes and says, hey, I have this piece of music or piece of art or an ebook that I want to sell, is part of the publication process them deciding which blockchain they want to be embedded into?
No, because the creators don't give a crap.
Okay, yeah, that's what I would say. It's like it's more confusion than it is anything else.
Yeah, right. So what we've done is before, when we were marketing our platform, we were marketing essentially a tool set that helped developers and brands integrate with blockchain easily, right? And we added a whole commerce layer on top of it. Now, when we're marketing to creators, we explain to them that we're going to give you a legal platform to, directly own and distribute and sell your content, secured by blockchain technology as a footnote. Like, you don't really need to know what that means. It's the way it has to be done to prevent copyright laws like Redigi experienced. And so it's like a footnote, but it's a necessary footnote because some of the things that we're trying to do wouldn't be legal or technically feasible without blockchain technology.
Fascinating.
Now,
our creators care about making money.
Yeah.
And that's what we're giving them.
Now, can they, if their digital good is on the blockchain that's out there, can they technically take it and allow their customers to view it, but from some other platform? Like if they're like, I'm done with Curios for a reason.
Yeah, we're not exclusive.
Okay, so you're like you're the front end to them having access, their customers having access to it, but they could technically use some other front end if they chose to.
Yeah, we believe that if we do our job well, they'll want to stay with Curios. Not necessarily exclusively, but have it be a home base. One of the other things, similar to Shopify versus eBay, right? When you have a Shopify store, you get your customer information. It's a direct sort of deal. Whereas on eBay, you don't know who's buying your stuff. We're more like Shopify. So when creators come on there, they publish their stuff. We're not like Amazon claiming that we have any rights over it. We're just giving you the tools to sell it and the tool to build your customer base. You get the contact information of whoever buys your content. You can remarket to them. And so by using Curios, and stop telling people to follow you on Instagram, that doesn't help you. Tell them to follow you on Curios. You can then actually engage with them and get them to buy your content, where you keep 100% of the proceeds, versus Amazon, where you keep like 10% of the proceeds.
So does Curious, when I was looking at the site, it talked about email templates and email list curation. Is there also functionality just to kind of generally help creators create a like a creator ecosystem, like a fan base or community? Is it community building? That's the word.
Yeah. And that stuff's all in development, because it's there, but early stage. We started with the commerce aspects, which was like, you need to sell digital content. It needs to be legal, and technically feasible. We built those tools. Now that you're selling content, you need to be nurturing your customer base or fan base or reader base, whatever you want to call it. So first and foremostly, we're giving you that information, which is the most important step. Once you have a list, there's any number of tools out there you can use. But secondarily, we're building some of those tools directly integrated so that you don't have to export the emails and take them over to MailChimp, right? You can keep them in Curios and nurture your community there. And that's kind of like phase 2.
Gotcha. Okay, so let me ask another question that is maybe just a naivete question. Because you are using this blockchain-based technology to track the digital goods, does that make it easier at all to accept payments that are based on something like
No.
Bitcoin? Okay, so it's similar technologies, but not really related.
Yeah. So what we've done is we separated the commerce layer from the blockchain layer. We do take crypto payments, but they're not like related to the token ownership. Once we verify a crypto payment, we then run a script that issues the token to who it needs to go to. And so they are synchronized, but they're separate layers.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's
by the way, this was blasphemy a couple years ago. Not to toot my own horn too much here, but we were pioneers in this idea that like blockchain and crypto and wallets are extremely difficult and for no benefit, right? Let's stop doing those stupid things. What people care about is owning their token. Like how they get there is like a journey that we can make a lot easier. And so when we started accepting credit cards for NFT payments, we were like shunned in the industry. Now everybody does it. Of course, nobody gives me credit for it, but
let me ask you a very tangential question for a second. And this is a legal question, so you may have no idea whatsoever. My understanding is that the blockchain is forever. It's kind of like a like an append-only ledger kind of a thing. So maybe that's true, maybe that's not. I'm not exactly sure. But obviously now in the EU, they have a lot of right to forget laws where people can ask to have their data removed. Let's just say, to make it more of a concrete example, let's say one of your creators publishes a song and then they get sued because maybe they borrowed I don't know what the right music terminology is, but like a clip from another song, a beat, whatever the right terminology is, and they're getting sued and some other artist says, actually, I own that melody, you can't use it in your song. And so they say, okay, that was my bad. I didn't realize, let me remove it from the store. But it's like the fact that they owned it and published it, is that just forever on the blockchain, or can that be removed as a matter of record?
Great question. So to clarify, what we're publishing on the blockchain is the right to access the content. The content itself is not on the blockchain. Now we have a vision in the future where the content is decentrally distributed so that people can't be canceled or can't be shut down. And can't be censored, right? And there are differing opinions on that. Happy to engage in a debate, but that's not really possible now. Even if it was technically possible, which comes with a lot of challenges, there are legal setbacks like the one you just presented, right? So what we have opted to do for now is sell the right on the blockchain, which can't be taken away. Someone could like buy and sell that right and transfer it all around however they want. But if the content behind that gets taken down, then that right is useless, right? It's like having the right to access a club that burnt down. Well, the club's gone.
Okay, gotcha.
So,
it's so fascinating.
Yeah. What we're trying to do, of course, like prevention is going to be our best friend right now, is prevent anything from getting published that's going to create problems. So we tried to do as many checks before publishing anything, even though we can take it down after the fact. but we're just trying to avoid that where possible.
You're saying that brings up a big difference between the physical good and the digital good, because of what you just described. If I went out and bought a CD, I don't even know if anyone does that anymore, or I don't even know if you can. Do they sell? Anyway, let's say in theory they
Vinyls is what
CD
everybody
players.
buys. Vinyls.
My 5-disc changer is no longer valuable. If someone were to say, "Hey, that music, it's copyrighted, you can't use it anymore," in a digital world, you could actually take that down, especially in a world where you guys are only selling the rights to access it. If the underlying thing is gone, it's gone. That's interesting protection for all copyright holders, because the original copyright holder, once the cat's out of the bag and everyone has the actual physical good, then they have no ability to kind of suck it all back up. Yeah.
This sorry, this is a tangent, but this reminds me of when I was writing the code.
That's what we do here
for the rights management, and essentially trying to figure out how to stream the file using ColdFusion to the browser. I'm sure I came across your blog like at least 13 articles that I had to read to try and accomplish this. Because the way we did it is we take the binary and we encrypt it using AES encryption algorithm and save it to disk. And then what we do is we read the file, decrypt it, cache that decryption for a certain amount of time, because the decryption process takes a lot of time, a lot of CPU, and then serve the buffer essentially out to the browser, but it has to be in chunks because it's streaming. So it has to be able to respond to, it has to, I forget what the codes are. It's been so long since I did this.
Like skip ahead 30 seconds kind of stuff.
Yeah. It was really a conundrum and got it to work. It was really interesting. But then of course we just switched to using a cloud provider and, calling their API to generate signed URLs that expire in 5 minutes, and that works good too.
Yeah, because the cloud providers, my understanding, I haven't really done this, but my understanding is that it has a lot of built-in encryption at rest or managed key encryption kind of functionality. They do.
Yep. So you just create a private, bucket or folder or whatever it's called, and you say make this accessible via, this signature for 5 minutes, and if somebody tries to access it after 5 minutes, gets an error. But trying to do that in ColdFusion was quite the feat. It worked. Just took some. There was no straightforward tutorial. I had to piece together a bunch of knowledge bases to make it work.
So how does it work? Or have you guys dabbled in the offline music? Where can someone listen to it offline?
Yes. So music right now is not supported offline, but ebooks and audiobooks are. And the fundamental concept is that you decrypt it, you encrypt it locally, and you issue a decryption key to the client that expires. And so they can decrypt that content for a certain amount of time, and then they have to request a new key. That's the concept, essentially.
And then some of it, I imagine, is just legal issues that can't be solved in a digital way. For example, let's say, I don't know if this would even make sense for your platform specifically, but let's say a person who designs digital fonts created a new font and they want to sell it, and they have different licensing agreements for if you want to use it on the web, it's cost this much, but if you want to use it in a published book, it costs this much. And, at some point, once someone has the font on their computer, whether it goes into a web page or whether it gets into a PDF, that's, that's outside of what your purview would be. That's just
exactly. And in Netflix is the same. Like if you put, a piece of hardware or middleware between your screen and the Netflix streaming, service, you can just grab those pixels and store that. Right. I've never done this, just to be clear, but I know it can be done. So there is a limit to the effectiveness of digital rights management.
Yeah,
we're just trying to make sure that we meet those standards, whatever they are, and then hopefully can improve them in the future.
This takes me
interesting. Back. It's funny you talk about things that people can't do or you don't do. I've heard about people doing this where if they borrow a library book, because you can borrow digital library books nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you run out on your Kindle or something, and you run out of time, you're supposed to give it back. You just put your Kindle in offline mode, and you can keep reading it indefinitely.
Right.
Because it doesn't call home to to make sure that you still have rights to
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
to what you were talking about, if you have an authentication key that's only good for so long, or an encryption key that's only good for so long, your platform of reading that, once it realizes that that's the time period has been expired, they can no longer access that. So you can kind of control for some of that offline mode Kindle book watching in a platform like Curios.
Yeah.
So is there a Curios app that people install on their computer?
There is. Yep.
Okay, gotcha.
Used
That makes
for
sense.
streaming content, right? So
Yeah,
you can listen to music, watch videos, hear audiobooks, read EPUB files. There's no marketplace or purchasing or anything like that. It's just the streaming content. And we're working to get it integrated with services like Sonos so that people can, play on their Sonos speakers and stuff. We're trying to, get out of the way. We're not trying to change the way people consume content per se. We want to meet people where they are there. We want to change the way people purchase that content. I talk about like the ownership economy versus, the subscription fatigue economy, right? Where people rent their house, they rent their car, they lease their car, they pay subscriptions to rent digital content from everybody. And it's like, whatever happened to just like, buying something?
It's funny. There was some comic I saw a while back where someone was like, I'm paying for all these different streaming services. Someone should just create a service that sits in front of all of it, so I only have to pay one fee. And it was like someone just reinvented cable.
Yes, exactly. I was so excited that like we got away from cable, and now it's essentially become cable again. It's just streaming a different way. It's wild.
All right, so the ColdFusion stuff, all of the customer facing stuff, the website, the platform, obviously not the app you install, but that's all built on ColdFusion as a technology.
Yeah, so our API layer essentially is all ColdFusion. So you've got different clients. You've got the mobile app as a client. You've got our marketplace website, which is a client, and that's built in React, JavaScript. And potential our studio, same thing. Those are all your clients, and they connect to the ColdFusion service, the API layer, which then connects to the database and returns data.
Nice. Yeah, I was poking around in the creator, not the studio, but looking at the list of books, like browsing the books and the audio books, and you could do the preview of the audio, and then you continue to click around the studio, and you get that bar along the top where the song. Or the song, the audiobook continues to play even as you continue to explore. I like that. But
that's only possible with the JavaScript, right?
Yeah. Very cool.
You seem to have a lot of romance novels. I noticed as I was looking at that. So that must be. I don't know how they all found you, or if that's just the big digital content nowadays. But I saw that. I was like, oh wow!
I'm really into the werewolf romance, so that's just what we sought out. No, we when we launched our vertical, so we always try to have what I call a flagship creator. Tory Lanez was our flagship creator for music, and Willow Winters was our flagship creator for ebooks and audiobooks, which we only launched in September. And she, as it turns out, is a romance author, but like pretty well known, very, very successful. And so that's just what came with it, was a lot of interest from romance authors. We're now, of course, expanding into other categories. And some of it is our queries and algorithms for elevating and recommending content need to be improved, because we just did super simple ones. It's like get the newest stuff, make the newest stuff visible, and we'll get like an influx of romance authors, and then like a few sci-fi authors, and then another influx of romance authors. So there's more than romance on there. We just haven't done a good job of surfacing it, right? Something we need to work on.
To be clear for the listeners, value add here, the romance novel industry is massive. It has its own conferences. It has a tremendous amount of authors. It has a mind-bending number of subgenres where you can get super specialized. Like, I want vampires, but I want historical fiction vampires that take place on the open seas. Like, it's very, very highly curated to specific needs, and people make a tremendous amount of money in this world.
You're quite right, and I only learned this recently. How do you know all this, Ben?
It was either This American Life or like a Radio Lab episode. They went deep, or it's probably Freakonomics. That's what it was. Freakonomics. They went deep into this world.
Yeah, some people say the only authors that are making money are romance authors right now. So it's a very prolific industry.
People pay their school loans on their romance novel fees. So my wife, one of her very first jobs, she worked at a library, and she said that it's like on Mondays, women would come in with bags and they would just get all of the latest romance novels, read them that week, and then come back and exchange them the next week. Like
Voracious.
It was just, yeah.
Like a book a day. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I guess it's like a certain age when if you're a stay-at-home woman and your kids go to college, you're like, well, got some time. Let's read some books.
Yeah, they are page turners.
Yeah, Grant, you gotta get into the rental market for your ebooks or the audiobooks to have someone be able to rent it for a week.
Yeah, we haven't tapped into that. And again, part of it's because we're specifically focused on bringing back the ownership economy. But renting is different than subscribing. So like we're not trying to follow Patreon's model, for example. Let them keep doing that. That's fine. I'm personally not opposed to renting books. I think it gets back into that question of renting versus secondary market. Is that taking away money from the author? And these people are already squeezed so much, especially because there's so many of them now. It's a flooded marketplace. There's something like 4,000 new authors a day or something like that. So we're just like, here's a chance to make a buck. And if you write something good, you'll make $1 million. And these are the tools to do it.
Now, we talked a little bit in the pre-show about AI. I know we may touch on collectibles.com here in a minute, but you brought up all the books that are coming out. How much checking do you do to validate whether or not a book, or do you even care if a book was written by AI?
So we're kind of in the middle. We don't care a ton, but we believe in transparency. So we ask that our authors specify if their book is either AI assisted or AI written. And a lot of them are doing a pretty good job of honoring that. There are definitely some that we see who are very obviously written by AI and not disclosing that. But at the end of the day, what does it matter, right? Someone has, via some method created content that you want to consume and you're willing to pay for it. Who cares about anything else?
Although this is not necessarily your responsibility here, but I have heard some kind of horror stories on podcasts where people say, I published a book, like I, literally spent the last 12 months writing this book, and I publish on Amazon, and literally within days, there's 7 different spin-offs of their book, that have been auto-generated and tweaked and re-illustrated. Right. And, that sucks, but this.
Yeah. So this is the Wild West right now.
Yeah.
It really is. And I admittedly don't have the answers. And
I don't think anyone does.
Luckily for us, we're not technically a publishing or copyright or like content creation platform. We are a content selling platform. Obviously, if someone's selling content they don't have copyrights to, we cooperate with takedown requests. But other than that, it's like you've got content, you're checking a box that says you're the rights owner for this content, you can publish it. If we find out otherwise, we'll have to take it down to cooperate with local authorities and whatever. But it's totally the Wild West, and I don't think that anybody has the answer, right? I mean, copyright law is pretty well established, but there's something in like patent law where if you patent something and somebody copies it but modifies it only 20%, it's therefore something new. And is copyright the same? So it's like, yeah, it's my book, but you changed the names and like twisted the plot this way just enough to where it's a different book. And I'm admittedly not a copyright expert, but it's a strange time. I'll tell you that much.
One thing, kind of circling back for a second to this idea of all these different streaming services and all these different AI services that you can now subscribe to and wanting a sense of consolidation. One thing that I have experienced as a customer is that early days of audiobooks, I was buying them through Apple's iBooks or just the Books app, whatever it's called now. And then in the last couple of years, I've become an Audible member. And so all of my new audiobooks are purchased through Audible. And I would love to just uninstall the Books app on my phone. And I would love to be able to take the things that I bought and, they're mine, I paid for them, and say, can I just upload them to Audible somehow?
Bingo.
And that way I could have one app. But I don't know. I don't know if maybe it just doesn't make any business sense, or there's legal issues there.
Yeah. So Apple and Amazon are really good at being monopolies without getting sued for antitrust laws somehow. They want to be a walled garden as much as possible, and they do not want to cooperate with everyone else. I think that there's a future, hopefully it's Curios, maybe it's somebody else, where again, an author has a home base where it's like, here's my content, here's where my readers can come to me. And if the author wants to distribute that content through other marketplaces like Amazon and Apple, they can do that. But the fundamental content distribution comes from this, I'm going to say, central repository that may be decentralized in nature, but it is a single access point that the author controls because they're the rights holder. And that means that anybody who buys their content, wherever they buy it from, they can move it wherever they want, right? Back to kind of the open meta concept. I believe in that future, and it's something we're working towards. We're trying to be that home base. Upload your content here. We do all the rights management for you. We will open doors to Amazon and Apple if you want us to get your content out there. But as long as somebody can prove that they purchase your content through their token, they can access it through Apple or directly through us or however they want to.
It's gonna be interesting as you're explaining that. And I was thinking, okay, hey, if you moved the content from one place to another, how would you then authenticate that it was the original person? Because you could I could give Ben my wallet code, I guess, and say, hey Ben, just like my Netflix password.
Yeah.
Hey Ben, here you can now use this to also now watch your videos, or maybe not Netflix anymore. I think they cracked down on that, but they could then also access that.
Yep. So same problems that already exist. Yeah, nothing new. We have some multi-factor authentication protocols in place if people choose to use them. Ticketing is the best example. So like if it's a really exclusive event, it's invite only, right? You issue 100 tickets, big celebrity event. You don't want somebody handing the ticket to like their friend who's, a big fan of the celebrity and is going to make a scene. So they have to be on the list. It's not just about the ticket. So what do you do at the door? You've got their name, you check their ID. We essentially have digital versions of that, right? So people not only have to have the token, but they have to, they can multi-factor to like the email address that the token was issued to, or, verify their identity through any sort of like KYC or, just show your ID old fashioned way. So these aren't new problems, right? They're existing problems, and the same solutions are in place for them.
Something just popped into my head, totally unrelated to anything you were just talking about, but if you can grant me some wiggle room here. For those of us who typically develop our ColdFusion applications or, whatever kind of applications on a standard database, whether it be relational or NoSQL, there's typically some sense of a transaction. Here's a couple things that need to happen atomically, and if any one of them fails, then the whole thing rolls back and it's like it never happened. You can get a little bit more complex where maybe you have to catch an error and then maybe implement some sort of a compensation control to more explicitly roll something back. In a world where you're now dealing with a blockchain, which I think has historically been, nowhere near as fast as a database, and you're also then probably having to either manifest some of that data into the database as well, or you keep, I don't know what how the corresponding tokens and all the records are
managed. We track all the token data off chain and on chain.
Gotcha. Yeah. So there must be a lot of situations where either the call to the blockchain stuff, there's a network blip and that breaks, or you've made the call to the blockchain and then there's a deadlock in the database for whatever reason. Now you have to roll something back, but it's not, you're not in that same transaction, and then it's on the blockchain. So it can't just be rolled back. It's there forever now. Talk to me about that a little bit. Like, what are the fun intricacies in terms of just making sure these two very radically different data systems are kept in sync?
Yeah. So, in our tech stack, only about 5% of what we've developed is blockchain tech. The rest of it is commerce, user interface, indexing, caching.
Gotcha. Okay.
The list kind of goes on and on. Lifecycle management, queues, that kind of stuff. What we do on blockchain is really simple fundamentally. There's essentially, call it an app that can mint tokens. And we either say mint token or transfer token, and that's it. Or tell us the status of the token. So there's some getters there. And you talked about a transaction. We essentially have broken that down into two transactions. There's the commerce transaction, right? And that's all wrapped in its like error handling and like, let's make sure the payment is good. And it gets even more complicated because with credit cards, there could be disputes and refunds.
Right.
You know, but that's all its own thing. And then there's a synchronization transaction or a synchronization script that calls a blockchain transaction. And that's wrapped in its own, you know, error handling. The blockchain part is incredibly finicky, fails all the time.
Right. I imagine
So we had to remove a lot of core features away from reliance on that, which is why we have our own like indexer and cacher of the state of the token. So they can diverge potentially, but we're always trying to synchronize. But there can be moments where the actual state of the token isn't reflected in our system. And this is a common practice now. Like, again, we're at the forefront of this stuff. We didn't necessarily invent it, but now everybody does it.
If I can interject for one moment, for my own mental mapping here. One pattern that I've heard discussed in distributed architectures is, I don't know if this is an official term, but I think it's often referred to as like the outbox pattern, where let's say you need to have two systems synchronized and one of them relies on a relational database. You can write the relational database records that you need to have, and in that same transaction, have another relational table that says like, this is the thing that you have to persist to this distributed system, so that those two records can happen transactionally, atomically. And then you have another system that says, okay, now that everything that's been stored in that little outbox table, I now have to continue to retry it until it can be persisted elsewhere. Is that the kind of thing?
So in concept, that's a lot of what we do. So what we call it is issuing a token. We issue it to our relational database, but it hasn't been minted yet on the chain. And then there's a synchronization that like tries to mint it and has to wait for a response because it's not a real-time transaction, and then updates the state of that token that was issued in our database to what we're being told it exists on the blockchain. And so if you remember, what I believe an NFT's purpose is to prove the ownership of something intangible. You only need to verify in real time the state of that token when somebody's trying to do something that requires ownership, like get a decryption key, which they do once every 24 hours. So it's like, hey, I'd like to access this content. No problem. Let's verify you still own this token. Takes a few seconds, or like, oh crap, the blockchain didn't respond, which happens a lot. Try again. But they only have to do that once every 24 hours. And it's all automatic, right? They don't have to like do things. It's just like, you know, getting your content, right? It's checking the blockchain. You still own it. Great. Here's your decryption key. You're good for 24 hours.
So I've heard, and maybe this is not true, or maybe this is true in a different scenario, or this is not true any longer, that the blockchain is very slow and something like only 7 transactions can be performed globally per second or per minute or something.
Yeah. So this is why so many blockchains exist, because people keep trying to solve that. Oh, like, well, our blockchain is faster. And then you have, they build different layers on top of the blockchain. Like, you could argue that ours is a layer 3, because we actually use Polygon, which is a layer 2 of Ethereum. So, but ours is
you're just saying words. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. This is where the Web3 people come in and start throwing buzzwords, and you're like, wow, you know so much. And it's like, it's all just
but the fact that you're working essentially in the database first and then persisting to the blockchain, does this sort of get around that
100%
latency?
We have no limitations. Like we once did like 300,000 in like a matter of hours. Now that didn't happen on chain. It took like weeks for all that to mint on chain, but it didn't stop people from purchasing and accessing.
So how do you solve that scale problem? Because if you guys tripled in size, where do you see the future of how you guys do things with trying to solve that scale problem?
Yeah, it essentially becomes higher and higher abstraction layers, right? And so that's why I say when we're a layer 3, like there are what are called ZK rollups, zero knowledge rollups, and I'm probably going to butcher this if I try to explain it, but essentially they take an abstraction layer will take 1 million transactions and like hatch those into a single transaction on the underlying blockchain. But they're still verifiable, because if you change that data in any way and try to rehash it, it would no longer match the hash. So, you know, it's not a valid, like, you know,
Gotcha.
query.
Like it's like a checksum for a download kind of a thing.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking of it. So that's what's happening, right? And people are building these abstraction layers that first do an off-chain thing that's then synchronized on-chain. Although those abstraction layers themselves can be chains, right? So they could be decentralized platforms on top of other decentralized platforms. But it's wild. Like, it just keeps getting more and more complicated. And I'm like, what the blockchain does and was ever intended to do is something really simple. It takes the data from the block before, hashes it, and includes it in the next block of data, so that you know that that data is only valid if the hash matches the previous hash. And like, that's it. That's all blockchain does. It's just validating data. People have tried to turn it into so many other things, but
it's interesting.
Right, because then there's like Bitcoin mining, but that's totally unrelated. It's just...
Dude, it took me forever to understand what Bitcoin mining was, because they call it Bitcoin mining. And I'm a collector of crystals. I don't know if you can see any of my crystals in the background. There's one of my crystals.
Oh, nice.
But so I think of mining, I'm like, wait, I don't understand. Like, what are people doing? Digital mining, like, is this like Spelunker, the Nintendo game, from back in the day? Anybody remember that? And it's just another like word that they use to describe something not related to mining in any capacity. So if you host a server node or a compute node that will process transaction requests, they call that mining. And after you process enough transactions requests, you're issued a Bitcoin.
Oh, okay.
It's just a reward mechanism.
Distributed processing kind of
distributed processing. Yeah.
It's all the DevOps guys installing servers in their company's data centers, and not telling their bosses.
Yep.
Well, when I was a kid, and I don't know if this is still a thing, it probably is. SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. I was trying to remember what the I stands for. They had this thing where you could install an app on your computer, and whenever you weren't using your computer, the SETI program would essentially use your CPU to scan, I guess it was to process all of the data that comes back from their giant dish arrays. Yeah. But I guess it's kind of like that. Interesting.
It's kind of like that. But it's not mining.
DeepSeek is trying to do the same thing.
Yeah. Bitcoin mining aren't even like harvesting data. They're just distributed CPUs.
Oh, okay. I feel it's silly that I didn't know this. I
told you, like, people feel like they don't understand Web3. It's all because of the words that are used. The actual concepts are really simple.
Because I looked up one time, just out of curiosity, could you hook up a Bitcoin miner to a stationary bike, and like how many miles would you have to pedal to earn a Bitcoin? And it almost feels like that question doesn't make sense. It's like you'd have to be using the stationary bike to power a computer.
Right. It's more about like how many CPUs are you powering, and how much you need to pedal to power those CPUs, and how many CPUs does it take to earn a Bitcoin in a day or something like that.
Yeah. And I was just going to say that I did find an article that did some back of the envelope math to try and figure it out. And it was something ridiculous. It was like you'd have to pedal for like 17,000 years for one Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Now, for the blockchain, there was a movement to switch from proof of work, which is highly CPU intensive, to, is it proof of state, which is more drive intensive? Has that impacted what you guys do at all? Does that change your cost structure?
No, because we run on Polygon, which is a layer on top of Ethereum, and Polygon's already fast because it's an abstraction layer, so it didn't directly affect us. And to be honest, I didn't spend time researching it enough because I didn't care. Like, our use of the blockchain is simple, as I think people's use of blockchain should be. It serves a simple purpose. Use it for that purpose and nothing more. And so a lot of those crazy complicated things that they changed don't really matter to me.
Interesting. Now,
such is my nature.
Such as what?
Such is my nature. Keep it simple.
Yeah, keep it simple always.
Now, so we talked about AI for a second ago, and you'd mentioned in the pre-show some interesting stuff you're doing with AI with Collectibles.com. And Ben joked about your ability to grab the most amazing domain names that we all wish we could have. So talk to us about what you're doing with AI. that's been a common theme amongst many of our shows recently on the Ben and Ryan show. So can you tell us what you guys are doing at Collectibles with AI?
Yeah, so I'll tell you an interesting story. So Curios, which most people don't know this apparently, but Curios is a word in the dictionary. A curio is a collectible, right? This is a curio cabinet behind it. So I had this idea for building AI-based collectibles platform called Curios, and nobody would invest in it. And this was like 5-6 years ago, and people were like, why are you doing this? The trend is NFTs. I was like, sure, I'll pivot to that, and got funding right away.
What's his name? Del Toro. Somebody. There's a very famous director who just did a Netflix series called like The Cabinet of Curiosities.
Oh yeah. Was it Benicio del Toro?
Yeah. No. That's the actor.
I know what you're talking about.
Guy who did Pan's Labyrinth. And I think,
I'm terrible with names, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, Cabinet of Curiosities. Or I think that's what it was called. It was a bunch of horror.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Anyways, so however, we kept the name Curios because we considered digital collectibles, right? These JPEG arts, the Bored Apes that people were buying, the name still applied. In fact, there's a lot of NFT companies out there that have come and gone and have tried to use the Curios name, but we have a trademark on it. There was a company called Curio NFT. There's Curio Cards. There's Curio.gg, which we recently, put on notice. I wasn't not the only person to come up with the name idea, but I do a lot of trademark stuff.
Nice.
Me and Meta are still going to have our heyday. So anyways, after, launching Curios and getting it to a, pretty established state, I've always been passionate about collectibles since a very young kid. I collect coins and crystals very avidly. I was still really passionate about it. So on the side, I've been kind of like pursuing, just dabbling in like how AI can be used for collectibles. And I have another site called Numis.com with 2 I's, Numiis. And this was my first stab at like using AI to identify your coin, tell you what it is, and tell you what it's worth. And that's, the fundamentals of collecting. But wanting to expand beyond that, I registered collectibles.ai, and I was like, I'm going to get beyond coins, and I'm going to use AI to, build a whole taxonomy of every collectible in the world and be able to price any of them. And that's essentially, the journey I'm going down. In that journey, I met some other guys who were trying to do something and similar, and through some like very complicated deal, I ended up acquiring and owning collectibles.com, and together we're using it to, launch what is currently live at collectibles.com. You can see it. But I am doing my own thing, collectibles.ai, by myself, which is separate. And that's more like really deep AI, like experimental, even beyond like what consumers are looking for. Can we use AI to discover like where a hoard of coins might be buried? Fun stuff like that.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Have you ever watched a show called Detectorists by any chance?
I don't remember if I've actually watched it. I probably watched like part of an episode. I watched the series. What was the Curse of Oak Island or something? They're trying to find some treasure.
Oh, I don't know that one. I'll look it up.
Generations. But
so the Collectibles AI is about generating NFTs that you could then host on.
No. Physical collectibles. It's about identifying.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, and determining their value. Although there's no reason why you couldn't. Think about the act of collecting, and everybody's a collector of some sort. Like I'm sure you guys have or do collect something. And what is the underlying drive for a collector? It's really like treasure hunting, fundamentally, right? You believe that you can find something that's worth a lot of money and either find it so you get that value for free, or buy it for less than what it's worth, or hold it and it goes up in value. There's always some sort of value component. And so in order to be like a fulfilled collector, you need to know what your things are worth. But that could be collector of NFTs. So there's no reason why we couldn't use, either, ML, AI, or like old fashioned calculations to figure out what the estimated value is of an NFT, which again, it's not the NFT itself, because the NFT just proves ownership of the artwork, but what is the value of that artwork that your NFT represents ownership of? And that's where I'm focused, is like primarily on, the value of things, which is a moving target. The X factor being humans, like some things go into interest and out of interest. So Bored Apes, their prices have gone like this based on consumer interest. And how do you account for that in your calculation?
So are you doing for sports cards, the grading is a big piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
Are you then doing AI grading of sports cards if they're ungraded?
Yep. Coins, cards, comics, stamps.
So could somebody theoretically go to an estate sale with a phone and just take little pictures of, this table was, 1850s such and such Italian designer.
They're selling it for $20. I'm buying it.
Gotcha. Very
It's
cool.
Yeah.
Or the Meta glasses. I mean, you just get the Meta glasses. So you're walking around and it's scanning everything and telling you when it finds a deal.
Yeah. And I actually think the inevitable monetization of the tech is going to be what I call programmatic arbitrage, where you're going to be identifying programmatically what something's worth or what its future worth will be and what its current worth is, and finding a big enough spread to where it's worth you buying it.
So interesting. Pro tip, I watch a lot of shows on BritBox. This is for the listeners here. And rare stamps are a great way to traffic illegal monies across state lines, because they're worth a tremendous amount of money. But anyone who's flipping through a folder and sees a little sleeve of stamps isn't going to know that that's $100,000 worth of stamps. So, if you want to commit fraud, that's a good avenue.
Between ripping digital content, romance novels.
Right, it's making notes.
Yeah. I'm definitely going to listen to this show more in the future.
I'm sorry, I cut you off there. What were you saying?
No, that was it. Yeah. So I'm a big collector, and collectibles, AI and collectibles are just a match made in heaven, in my opinion.
Very cool.
So both of you, a question for both you and Ben, because Ben, you read and consume knowledge and reproduce that knowledge out on social platforms for everyone else to kind of consume also, none of which is your job. And then you have a job, and then you have multiple podcasts that you're on. And Grant, you're doing, I've lost count of the number of companies. You have a platform company, you have a creator selling platform company, you have collectibles.ai, collectibles.com. How do you guys find the time for all this?
Well, first of all, I want to hear what Ben has to say about it, because you do a great job of publishing content, which I've never found time for.
I was going to say, I don't have kids, but Grant also does a lot, and he has 3 kids, so that's not necessarily the right. I think it's more about schedule. I have a schedule that I try to keep. Yeah,
I think you got to box everything in, including family time. You got to allocate that. But for me, one of the terms that I hate that people brag about a lot is serial entrepreneur. And I'm like, no. That means you're not doing anything really well. You're all over the place, right?
Oh, that's great.
So although I have a lot of companies, I'm not actively doing them all now. What I am doing right now is Curios and Collectibles. And Collectibles is essentially my side project, because I'll never have one thing. Call me, ADD, or call me someone who hedges my bets, but I'll never just do one thing. It's more like an 80-20, right? And don't tell my investors that. But I tell them I'm doing 100% Curios. But that's it for me. And I think doing 2 things is very feasible. Doing more than that is very difficult.
Yeah.
So do you actually have schedule? Do you have a hardcore schedule where you actually put in okay, here's my block for family time. So on your watch or whatever, your phone, it beeps and you're like, all right, I got to cut everything off, shut down. Or is it just a daily schedule?
It's daily. So I'm with the kids in the morning. I get them ready for school till 7:30. Then our nanny takes over. And then I get ready. So I'm available to work essentially around 8. And I work till 4 to 4:30 is my cutoff. And then I'm with the family. And then if I need to do more than that, it's got to be after the kids go to bed, which is after 8:30. That's my schedule. And weekends are pretty much all family. I block off 3 hours on Saturday, which is the unknown block. I could do whatever I want. If I've got errands, if I've got a project I'm behind on, or if I want to take a nap. And that's my schedule in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Nice.
Mornings are my Like early mornings are when I do most of my stuff, and then everything else is either work or family.
Yeah. Well, after kind of like the early mornings, everything becomes kind of like reactive. It's like,
Yeah.
where's the emergency?
When do you think, this is totally non sequitur ish, but I'm always curious about people who have a side company, and then at what is the threshold at which point you can go to LinkedIn and say like founder and president of, side company name? Because I'll go to some people's LinkedIn profiles and they're the president and founder of like 3 or 4 different companies, to
Serial
present
I've got like
day.
6, but mine are all chronological, right? So one door closes, one opens. Again, I think you could do a couple. Like I don't, my collectibles, I'm involved in the collectibles.com and I own the domain, but I'm not the CEO of that. Somebody else is the CEO.
Gotcha.
My collectibles.ai is experimental, so I don't even like publicize that. That's just stuff I'm having fun with. And I think a lot of it comes down to who's looking at your LinkedIn profile, right?
Like your investment partners.
Yeah. And I have fiduciary duties to my investment partners, which I do uphold and intend to uphold. And I think if I was to, I think it's a defensible position to say, oh, yes, I'm still running Curios and running this business. But that's not the case, actually, right? Collectibles AI is an experimental. It's certainly not a business. It doesn't have any employees. It's not incorporated. Collectibles.com is, but I'm not running that. Right. So I don't know. I'd like to believe that someone who's hardworking and focused and driven could have 2 things, and that's okay. But if that creates a perception problem for your investors, well, then it's not about you, it's about them, and you can't change their perception. So you got to think about who your demographic is that's looking at your profile. That was kind of a non-answer. But.
No. That's a great perspective. Absolutely. Because I always think about, I don't know, LinkedIn as like half professional resource and half showing off is not the right word, but it's like the place for me to beat my chest the way any social media platform really is. But it can swing back and hurt you if you're not doing it intelligently.
Yeah. I mean, I think of my my LinkedIn profile, I want to be identified as Grant the technologist and like digital product builder and collector. So like what business I'm actively doing is less relevant than like where my skills lie.
Right.
I don't know if that's how people see my profile, but that's how I'd like for them to see my profile.
Yeah, as an avid watcher of Shark Tank, I've seen them kill people before because they're like, oh yeah, I'm doing this other thing. And they're like, wait, which one are you full time at?
Yeah.
And they're like, no, I need you. If I'm, like, as Grant was saying, if I'm going to invest in you, I need you full time at this company, because if you're inventing something else, then you're going to go to that other shiny thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a false belief that investors have that they can that someone can focus on something full time. You can't. Like the brain gets fatigued. You have to have other things.
Yo, this is why I am always blown away when some news story comes out about someone famous who turns out they had a secret family, like 2 states over. And I'm like, where are you getting your energy? I don't understand. Like, I'm disappointed in the one family I have. 2 families.
But like the idea that investors are like, oh, you're going to just do this for 12 hours a day. I'd be like, you're going to lose me at hour 8. And then I'm just pretending to work, after that. You have to shift your brain a little bit. But I think what they're doing is they're trying to protect themselves from the serial entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Who's got 10 things they're doing and none of them are succeeding.
For employees, it's interesting is that I've talked to people about whether or not they're okay with their employees. I talked to business owners and whether or not they're okay with their employees doing little side hustles. And I think it's great personally, because then they have a chance to kind of experiment with something. And if something's working with their side hustle, a lot of the better ones will bring it into the main job. And it's a great way of being able to kind of do that experimenting, not quote unquote on company time. And they get even better as an employee in that function.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. I worked at Google for a year, and I thought their policy was really interesting that they would give engineers 20% time to do whatever they wanted. Of course, anything you did, they would own. I think that I think that culture's maybe changed a little bit, right? People who are hardcore engineers are going to be doing stuff on the side, experimenting, learning. And although Google won't own whatever they build, Google will be able to leverage the experience and learnings they had while experimenting, as long as they're not competing. So like I ran a digital agency for a lot of years before getting into tech startups. And I had incidents where people were like competing. They'd work for me on Google. So we ended up taking Google as a client. I left Google, started an agency. We took Google as a client. And they would compete with me and like do work and pitch work to like other Google teams outside of working for me. And I'm like, well, that's creating a big conflict. And even worse, like we were, researching augmented reality at the time. And one of my employees went out and like started his own augmented reality company. And we were trying to build integrated services into our agency. And I'm like, that's a direct competition. You have a problem there. But yeah, I mean, like this idea that you can own 100% of someone's like thoughts and ideas is antiquated.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also so mind-boggling to me when you hear about companies like a Google, which to the layperson, you think to yourself, this company has, more money than small countries. Like, why are they doing anything outsourced to an agency? And I'm not saying they don't have legitimate reasons to, but it's like, you create this story in your head of these juggernaut companies that you just imagine they do everything in-house. But it's fascinating to find out that no, actually they outsource when they need to outsource.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think that's why we ended up, losing the contracts with them. But we had a good 5-6 year run as an agency partner for them, and they're just like, oh, we could just do this all in house and not be spending money. Got 30,000 employees,
So it's interesting is Ben, you bring that up and the tie into Xbyte, because we talk about this with companies. Smaller companies will go to cloud because they don't want to do things themselves. Like they don't have the capabilities. Maybe they're just it's not a big enough investment for them to kind of take it over themselves, and that may go for a while. Then once they get big enough, kind of like, okay, Google's like, you know what, I've been doing this for long enough. I want to take it over myself. Same sort of thing as they move their servers on-prem, and they kind of do things on-prem for a while. But I think that's very common amongst any businesses. My sister runs an Amazon consulting business from marketing standpoint, and they're worried all the time about their customers thinking that, okay, you know what, we're a big enough company now. We thank you for consulting us and bringing us to this great level. Now we're going to go ahead and take it on ourselves.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because your job is going to help build somebody until they can realize that they want to do it all themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's also the idea of undifferentiated versus differentiated work. Like if your business is not infrastructure, it could still very well make sense to outsource that to a company like Xbyte, because like why, that's not the product you create as a company.
Right.
Why bother having a department?
It's not your core competency.
Yeah, exactly.
Xbyte's going to do it better. I'd actually love to hear more about Xbyte Solutions. I'm, admittedly wasn't familiar with the company before you reached out, so we can chat, another time, Ryan.
Okay. Yeah.
And
I'm always willing to talk about Xbyte. Ben knows.
My dog is in the hallway starting to growl at me, and I'm home alone. So I might, it might be time to take her for a walk.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome. I'd love to do it again anytime, guys. Thank you so much for having me, and really great to connect with other, technologists and smart technologists, no less.
Absolutely. Grant, this has been fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, great. And if you're going to come to any of the Adobe conferences, please look. I know we'll be there. Myself, Ryan, and Xbyte will be there. Ben, please also, I'd love to have you join us at any of the conferences, and we'll chat later about if that's possible for any of these.
I'll definitely be trying.
I will, for sure.
All right, Grant, I'll before we sign off, I'll give you a chance to kind of tell everyone a little bit about any last words for everyone, or how they can find you guys.
Yeah, so Curios.com, which is Curios. And again, we're primarily a platform for creators who want to distribute their books or their music albums. You get to keep 100% of the sale. and you get to keep 100% of the rights, as well as getting the reader or fans' contact information. Great platform. Check it out.
All right. Thank you guys very much. And we're signing off for this week. And if, as we always say, if you're looking for us, look for we're doing a Ben and Ryan show open mic here also. So it'd be your chance to anyone could join us. So look for those announcements on all the social platforms. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Ben. And as I've stolen Ben's sign off, cheers, everyone.
Cheers.